Okay, so I grew up on a family farm in a small town of Bonduel, Wisconsin. So although it's still considered a small town, there was only about 750 people in there when I was going to school. So growing up in the late 60s and 70s and 80s, there was a lot of my classmates came from farms. There are plenty of people that lived in towns too, but which I thought was pretty cool because they got to just walk to school, walk everywhere. And I always had to ride the school bus and you'd be on the bus for an hour, morning and night or whatever. But because a lot of the kids had the work ethic you find on a family farm, we sometimes felt that the city kids had it pretty good or were more privileged because they got to do after school activities, whereas we didn't have that option because we didn't have the transportation after those activities. So we needed to be home for chores. But being from a smaller community, you knew everyone and everyone pitched in whenever anything needed to be done because you knew someday that you were going to be on the other side of the coin. Both jobs obviously required a lot of commitment and a lot of work. I worked here at WPS for a couple of years before my husband and I moved on to our current farm. So I gained a lot of knowledge, especially on technology in the corporate world before we went and started out on our own, which is totally different than just growing up on a farm and not owning it. So just working on the family farm is totally different than getting on a farm. Now it's like, okay, you now need to pay all of these bills. You need to cover everything. You need to manage everything. So I was able to do pretty much a lot of that stuff because of some of the knowledge I gained working from Wisconsin Public Service, especially in the accounting department. That's where I learned a lot of the information I knew to do the farm books and things like that. So there were many days I would go from working full-time here down in town in Green Bay and then go back home and unload wagons of baled hay with the neighbor kids. That was just my day, but I couldn't let that impact my job at Public Service because I was committed to meeting the expectations that my boss had of me. I always said it wasn't their fault that I lived on a farm, that I lived in Bonduel, that I had the drive time back and forth. So I didn't want to use that, and I could not use that as an excuse to not meet their expectations of me. So although we definitely do some things differently and more efficiently now than we did when we first started farming, there's still a lot of labor involved in farming. So the difference now is that I don't have the 40-minute commute to and from Green Bay every day like I used to when I came into Green Bay here. So now with WPS switching to a totally remote workforce, basically, my switch from working as an admin assistant to being a farmer is 5 minutes from one computer to going out in the barn and doing chores at night. So that's a little bit of a different thing, but I still basically am doing all the same stuff I did previously. So I have to say I did it with a lot less sleep than I would have liked, definitely. I grew up on our family farm, and then when we got married, my husband and I got married, we moved into a home for a couple of years before moving on to our current farm. We've been there about 30 years now. So our son was almost 2 when we moved on to the farm. And so he became a farm boy very quickly. He went to the barn with me every night and he learned how to work, but he also learned how to play safely outside. So I just make up some silly little games to play with him in the barn in the colder months when he couldn't be outside. He always had cats and dogs to play with though too. So he was raised not to rely on electronic gadgets either to occupy his time. But because he came to daycare here in Green Bay for the first several years of his life, we had that special time driving back and forth to work each day. So he's very good at asking questions on the drives to and from Green Bay. My brother used to go bonkers when my son would come and visit because he would ask questions constantly. My brother was a bachelor at that time. So he said, does he ever quit? And I'll go, just answer him. That's, he needs to learn. So he always knew what was going on. But there were also times where I would pick him up from daycare and then go back to work and then still work in the evening. Or even on Saturdays, I would bring him along to work with me because I needed to get the work done, and my husband was farming, so he couldn't have him with him out in the fields with him at that point in time. So even though I was still working, it was still time that I got to spend with him, and I taught him. I think it helped me teach him how to behave more appropriately with adults. So it always made me proud when someone would say, he's well behaved, he's polite, because it meant that something I was trying to teach him actually finally sunk in. Doesn't always sink in all the time now yet. But because I've always carried the benefits for the family, it's very important that I not lose my job. I need that job because medical benefits especially are so super expensive right now and have been in the past. But it's very important so that I keep my job. So I've always made sure that my work assignments are done to meet the deadlines, to do what people are expecting of me. But work will always come secondary to my family. My family is top priority for me. So even after my son started school and was no longer going to daycare in Green Bay with me each day, I still made sure that I attended all of his school activities. I wanted to continue to be involved in his life. I didn't want to be that mom that was like, oh, who are you? Oh, you're Tyler's mom? You don't come to anything. No, I'm Tyler's mom, and I still want to be involved in his life. I mean, even when having mom around isn't so cool, I still wanted to be there. So, but as he got older, I was able to take on more responsibilities at the office. In addition, I did take some classes at NWTC for several years so that I could stay up to date on things that I needed to do my job. So my priorities were still the same, but as the years went on, the time I needed to dedicate to each thing shifted. So, however, to this day, I still do all the house and yard work and help in the barn while maintaining my full-time job. Okay, so obviously, real obvious what this is. So it's a cow because of my life on the farm. So I grew up on a farm, and I'll be a farm girl for the rest of my life. So no matter where I live, that's my life. It's just the way it is. So even though there's times where I didn't want the responsibilities of a farm, or trying to make ends meet when the milk prices were low, I still know my upbringing makes me the person I am today. So the second one is a picture of my parents. They're the ones who still instilled in me the value and ethics. So to this day, I still remember that doing a good job means doing a job right the first time and not taking shortcuts just to get done. So even when I screwed up and got punished, I knew it was only because they loved me and they wanted me to be the best person I could be, even if I didn't think so at that time. But Mom and Dad weren't rich in the monetary sense either. I mean, like I said, farmers just aren't rich. It's just not a fact of life. But they always made us kids feel like we were special and had everything we could possibly want or need. So I can't imagine being in a family where they're constantly fighting, or worse, not even speaking to each other, because I know of people like that who don't, like, when's the last time you talked to your brother? Oh, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I can't imagine that. So my brothers and my sisters, and my brother's sisters and I, we still text each other to make sure everybody's okay and to offer help if it's needed. So Mom and Dad taught us that God and family would always get us through everything, and we still believe that today.